When I was a kid, I grew up in a normal neighborhood. We had a nice mid-sized house in a very ordinary family. When I turned 7, we adopted a small dog named Max. He was my best friend for years. As I got older and started staying home alone more often, having Max there meant I never really felt like I was by myself. I never felt the need to worry or be afraid of anything. Unfortunately, that didn't last forever. When I turned 15, my family sold our home and moved about 20 minutes away to a more isolated, smaller house in a forested area. And sadly, that summer, Max passed away from old age. I was thankful it was summer, though. I had time to grieve at home without having to go to school. After a few days of the whole family mourning together, things went back to normal. My parents went back to work. I stayed home on summer break. But I immediately felt a difference. This was the first time I had ever been completely home, alone in my entire life without Max by my side. I was constantly paranoid and uneasy about every small sound coming from the house. Not to mention, we had only lived there for a few months, so I didn't really know the area yet, or feel fully safe. Anyway, just a week after losing Max, it was another regular day. My parents left for work. I stayed home. The house was only one story. The layout was basically a straight line. When you walk in the front door, there is the kitchen and living room, which then leads to a long hallway with 2 bedrooms on the sides, and my parents' bedroom at the end. For the past week of being alone, I had always walked down that hallway and closed all the bedroom doors. For some reason, I didn't like seeing the doors open. It just gave me a weird feeling. So this day was no different. I went along the hallway, closing each door until I got to my parents' room. I pulled the door through the doorway and started walking back. But immediately, I realized I hadn't heard the click of the door being fully shut. I turned back around and pulled the door shut more firmly. This time I heard the click of the latch locking in place. I went back to my room where I had my computer, closed the door, put on my headphones, and watched YouTube for almost 2 hours straight. There wasn't much else to do. By this point, it was about 9 in the morning, and I was ready for some breakfast. I laid my headphones on the desk and opened my bedroom door, stepping into the hallway. As I stepped out and turned toward the living room, I couldn't help but notice something was off in the corner of my eye. I turned my head to look back down the hallway, and instantly froze. The door at the end of the hallway was open. I mean, wide open. I must have stood there for a whole minute, just trying not to make any noise and listening for any movement in my parents' bedroom. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I knew I had closed that door. There was no way it could have opened on its own. I was pretty confident that somebody could be in the house, but I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps, no breathing, no voices. I had no idea where they might be. They could have been in any room in the house by now. I decided to very quietly and slowly walk through the living room and into the kitchen, frantically swiveling my head all around, terrified that they were hiding somewhere nearby. When I reached the kitchen, I grabbed one of my parents' large steak knives. Gripping it tightly in my right hand made me feel slightly better, but I was still absolutely terrified. I quickly and carefully double-checked the living room and dining room, making sure the intruder wasn't hiding anywhere. Then I stood at the end of the hallway. I walked down to the spare bedroom, trying to open the door quietly. But it was old and creaky. Everything inside seemed exactly as it had been left. Nothing moved at all. I backed out and closed the door. I saved my parents' bedroom for last, since that was the room with the open door. I was terrified. It didn't help that this house was in the middle of a forest, knowing that no help was anywhere nearby. A steak knife feels a lot smaller when you don't know where they're hiding. I stood at the doorway for another minute, only able to see half of my parents' bed while clutching the knife and listening. It was dead silent. Fear continued to rise inside me as I called out shakily. No response. I tried to sound confident, but I knew it was a thin act. I took a step inside, looking around the corner. The room seemed empty, just like the others. Nothing moved, nothing out of place. I even crouched and looked under the bed. No one was there. I walked to the other side of the bed. Just as I noticed a small spot of dirt on the floor, I heard a soft thud behind me. I jumped, heart racing, and stared at the bathroom door. It was shut. I could hear frantic movement in there. I could also see a slight shadow moving under the door. A few seconds passed as I stood there, frozen in fear. Then I heard one last thud, followed by footsteps fading away outside the house. Still in shock over what had just happened, I carefully walked over and opened the bathroom door. I immediately noticed the window was open. I quickly closed and locked it. Then I ran to my room to grab my phone. I don't know why I never called the police. I guess I was just young, and I didn't want them to come over if nobody was actually there. But looking back, I know I should have just left the house and called the cops immediately. What was I thinking? The open door at the end of the hallway wasn't an accident. Anyway, I called my parents first. They called the police and came home soon after. During their investigation, officers found small patches of dirt from someone's shoes pretty much throughout the whole house, except for my room. They were able to tell you it was only one person. But strangely, they didn't take anything. Not a single thing was missing from our home. That was obviously really creepy and unusual. It made the intruder's motives much more disturbing. We moved out of that house several months later, mostly due to other problems with the property. Being in my 20s now, I still think about this encounter every once in a while. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been wearing my headphones. If I had heard the person enter, I probably would have looked and seen them. It's terrifying to imagine. But I'm thankful for how everything turned out, even though the intruder was never caught. If you made it through this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, Witnessed Horrors. Drop a comment below. Have you ever closed a door only to find it open again later? Stay safe, and always check the bathroom. It was a regular weeknight, probably around 7 in the evening. I had gotten home from work maybe an hour earlier and was fixing myself dinner. Nothing special, just a small chicken breast and some frozen corn. I had just finished cooking the chicken and started draining the water from the corn when I heard it. A light scraping sound traveled through the house. It was short and quick, not very loud, but it was strange enough to make me flinch. I kept doing what I was doing, telling myself it was just some weird noise the house made that I had never noticed before. Then that same scraping sound vibrated through the walls again. It was so unusual. I had no idea what could possibly be causing it. I quickly finished putting my food on the plate and walked toward the front door, hoping to hear it again and figure out where it was coming from. I waited for maybe 30 seconds. Nothing. So I went back to the table and started eating. Even then, I wasn't really worried, just curious. Why was the house making that sound? I spent a few minutes eating, then moved to the couch to rest and watch some Netflix. But through the show, I kept hearing that obnoxious scraping sound over and over. Eventually, it got so aggravating that I turned off the TV and just sat there listening. When the sound came again, I could hear it more clearly. It was coming from somewhere upstairs. I quickly walked up to the second floor. At this point, I was still mostly annoyed that the house was ruining my relaxing night. But part of me was also starting to get concerned that something might actually be wrong with the house itself. At the top of the stairs, I stayed in the hallway, waiting again. A whole minute passed. Nothing. So I started checking the rooms, making sure everything was okay. Nothing seemed unusual or broken. Now I was really getting confused and worried. I put on some shoes and went outside. It was dark, but I figured I might be able to see a tree branch scraping against the siding or some other obvious issue. I went to the side of the house where I knew there was a tree, but it wasn't windy at all. The branches were nowhere near the walls. I just stood there wondering how this was happening and why it had suddenly started tonight. I was tired. This was the last thing I wanted to be doing. I walked back around to the front of the house. On my way to the front door, a glimmer of light caught the side of my vision. I turned and looked. It seemed to be coming from somewhere near the front of the house. I walked further down the driveway toward the sidewalk and looked back. That's when I saw a small light coming from one of the windows in a dark room of my home. After a couple of seconds, I realized it was the attic window, and the light was moving, almost like someone was shining a flashlight around inside. I was horrified. Someone was in my attic, doing who knows what, for who knows how long. I stayed out front, calling the police as I stared at the window, watching the light move around slowly. But as I was talking on the phone, the light got dimmer. Then it shone directly at me, right through the window. They held it there for a couple of seconds, then shut it off. Even from outside, I could hear a few loud thuds coming from inside the house. The light in the attic wasn't looking for anything. It was looking at me. I immediately ran over to my neighbor's yard, trying to explain to the operator what was happening while looking back at my house in pure terror. From where I was standing, the house looked silent and calm, but that only made it more frightening, knowing that something awful was likely going on inside. After a few minutes, nothing else happened. The police finally arrived. They searched the house first, then brought me inside to talk. They found multiple shoe prints in the attic. Their theory was that it was probably a group of teenagers messing around, trying to get a reaction, not trying to cause real harm. There were no signs of anyone living up there, which was a relief. They also found some carvings in the wooden beams. Nothing specific, just random lines. The cops assured me the kids were probably just messing with me, trying to scare me for their own amusement. But how could they be so sure? As for how they got in, they thought whoever it was might have climbed onto the roof while I was at work that day and gone in through the attic window. Then they exited through the attic doorway on the ceiling and got out through my back door. Teenagers or not, they were in my attic while I cooked dinner. I know the police said confidently that it was probably just a harmless group of kids. But that doesn't make me feel any safer. Knowing that some random people broke into my house and were camping out up there all day and night while I was home is deeply unsettling. Those cops didn't actually know what that group's intentions were. So who knows what they really planned to do?